Greg called at 11:08. Rachel was in the middle of rebooting the chief's desktop, a problem she'd already fixed twice this quarter, caused by the same Windows update the chief kept postponing because he didn't trust the blue screen that said, "Don't turn off your computer," when her phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced at it sideways, the way you look at something you've been waiting for all morning and now don't want to see. Greg's name. She let it ring twice. 3 times. She watched the screen pulse with each ring, his name appearing and disappearing like a question being asked and withdrawn. On the 4th ring, she picked up. "Hey," Greg said, calm voice, his courtroom voice almost measured with that careful warmth he put on for juries. She'd sat in the gallery once, early in their marriage, and watched him give closing arguments in a DUI case. He'd been magnetic. She'd driven home thinking she was lucky. That felt like information about a different person. "Where were you last night?" Rachel said. "Can we talk?" "In person. I don't want to do this over the phone." "Do what over the phone?" A pause. She could hear traffic on his end. He was in his car, driving somewhere, living his day. She was sitting in Chief Barlow's office chair with a screwdriver and a USB drive and a ticket queue that would be exactly as long when she got back to it. "There's that coffee place," he said. "The one near your station. Maple something. Can you meet me there in 20 minutes? I'm at work, Greg." "I know. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't." He stopped himself. She heard him take a breath, recalibrate. Starting over. "It's important, Rach. Please." The ratch landed wrong. It always landed wrong lately, but today it had a finality to it, like he was already practicing how to refer to her in past tense. "My ex-wife, Rachel. We're still on good terms." 20 minutes, she said, and hung up. She sat in Barlow's chair for a moment. The chief's office smelled like the cinnamon air freshener clipped to his desk fan, and the faint leather of the holster he hung on the coat rack every morning. There were photos on his desk. His wife, his grandkids, a fishing trip, the ordinary accumulation of a life that was staying in one piece. Rachel finished the reboot, closed the chief's laptop, and walked back through the bullpen. She stopped at Debbie's desk. "I'm stepping out for lunch." "Okay, hon," Debbie said. She was working on a crossword and didn't look up. The 7-letter word for obstinate. "Any ideas?" "Stubborn." "That's 7, Debbie wrote it in. "Thanks, sweetie." Rachel grabbed her jacket off the back of her chair and walked out through the side entrance. The November air had a bite to it, not cold enough for a coat, but enough to make her pull her jacket tighter across her chest and tuck her chin down. The sky was flat and white, the kind of overcast that didn't commit to rain but didn't let the sun through either. She sat in her car for a minute before starting the engine. She could see her breath, just barely. She drove the 4 blocks to the café. Amon, Maple, and Maine tried harder than it needed to. Exposed brick that had been exposed on purpose, a chalkboard menu in someone's careful hand, oat milk as a default, succulents on every table in small clay pots, most of them slightly overwatered. It was the kind of place that existed in Collinsville because someone's daughter had come back from Charlottesville with ideas, and the town had decided to be supportive about it rather than honest. Greg was already there. Rachel saw him through the window before she went in. Back table, facing the door. He had a coffee in front of him, untouched, and his hands were flat on the table like he was about to deliver a deposition. He was wearing the charcoal blazer she'd bought him 4 Christmases ago at a Brooks Brothers in Richmond. She remembered the fitting room, the salesman who'd called her Mrs. Morrow 3 times, the way Greg had turned in the mirror and said, "What do you think, Rach?" And she'd said, "You look like a lawyer." And he'd said, "Good." He'd shaved. That was the detail that stuck, the one she'd come back to later when she tried to piece together how this day had actually gone. He'd shaved carefully that morning for this. He'd stood in front of whatever mirror he'd woken up in front of and run a razor along his jaw and checked for spots he'd missed, and all of that was preparation for the conversation he was about to have with her. He'd groomed for this the way he prepared for court. She'd been eating dry cereal out of the box at 7:40 in yesterday's jeans. She pushed through the door. A little bell chimed. The girl behind the counter looked up and smiled. Rachel didn't smile back, not out of rudeness, but because her face had stopped doing things automatically about an hour ago. She sat down across from Greg. She didn't take her jacket off. She didn't order anything. "Thanks for coming," he said. "What's going on, Greg?" He moved his coffee cup slightly to the left, centering it on the saucer. A small, precise adjustment. Then he took a breath. Not a deep, dramatic one, just a small inhale, the kind a person takes when they've rehearsed the first sentence enough times that the only thing left is to say it. "I haven't been happy," he said. "For a while." He hadn't been happy. Rachel's hands were in her lap. She pressed her thumbnail into the pad of her index finger hard enough to leave a mark. The cafe was warm and smelled like espresso and baked goods and someone's perfume from a nearby table. A woman was laughing by the window. Outside, a truck drove past and the plates on the wall rattled softly. She waited for the rest of it, the part where he acknowledged that happiness was a thing that required showing up, that you had to actually be present in a life to be disappointed by it. He'd been home for dinner maybe twice a week for the last 3 years. He went to a study after. He came to bed late or not at all. She couldn't remember the last time he'd asked about her day and listened to the answer. And he'd been sitting somewhere, in his car or his office or a hotel room she didn't know about yet, tallying up his unhappiness like she was supposed to have been preventing it. "Okay," Rachel said. This isn't about blame. I want you to know that. This isn't about anything you did or didn't do." He had his lawyer voice on, the one that organized information into clean, defensible statements. Each sentence was its own paragraph. She could practically see the bullet points. Not about blame. Of course not. Blame would require him to look at what she'd actually been doing for the last decade. The mornings, the homework, the groceries, the school pickups, the entire architecture of a family life. He walked through like a guest. And he'd never once looked at that closely enough to know what blaming her would even mean. "What is it about?" "I think we should separate." He said it like he was reading a clause out loud. Neutral. Pre-approved. Then, quieter. "I've been thinking about it honestly, Rach, for a long time. And I think we both know things haven't been right. We both know." She noticed that. The we that made it shared, collaborative, like they'd been in this together the whole time, arriving at the same conclusion from opposite ends of the same table. As if he hadn't been the one pulling away for years while she held the seams. She watched his mouth move. She was aware of the vinyl seat sticking to the backs of her thighs through her jeans, the thumbnail pressing into her finger. The woman by the window still laughing. "Where were you last night?" she said. "I got a room. At the Comfort Inn off Broad Street." "Since when?" "Since Monday." Monday. 3 days. He'd been gone 3 days. She turned that over, slowly, like checking a bruise. 3 days, and she'd only noticed last night because he'd always worked late enough that his absence didn't fully register until the bed was cold in the morning. He could have been gone a week, and she might not have. No, she would have noticed a week, she thought. She was pretty sure. That fact sat in her chest, like something swallowed wrong. Not because it said something about her marriage that she hadn't already known. In the wordless way, you know a room has gone cold before you check the thermostat. But because he'd had 3 days. 3 days to find a hotel, to sit with his feelings, to get his thoughts in order, and put on his blazer and choose the right cafe and show up composed and clean-shaven with a speech ready. 3 days while she packed lunches and drove the kids and fixed the printer and texted him and didn't hear back. He'd given himself a head start. And now he was sitting across from her looking patient. Greg was watching her, waiting for a response. He'd left a silence for her, the way lawyers do. The strategic pause, the space where the other person was supposed to fill in their reaction. She didn't fill it. She let it sit there between them, widening, until he picked it back up himself. "I think we need to figure out what this looks like," he said. "Logistically. The kids, obviously, the house. I want to be fair about this. I want us to," quote. Her phone buzzed. Rachel glanced down. A text from Debbie. "Computers are acting weird. Can you come back when done?" She flipped the phone face down on the table. "I want us to handle this like adults," Greg said. He hadn't looked at her phone. He was in his speech now, in the flow of it, and he wasn't going to let a buzz derail his pacing. "I've already talked to someone. A lawyer, I mean. Not to get ahead of things. Just to understand the process." "You talked to a lawyer." "A colleague. Informally. Just to know what the options are." "A colleague. Informally." She could picture it. Greg, in someone's office, door closed, speaking in low tones about assets and custody, getting advice before she even knew there was something to get advice about. While she was at home wondering why he was working late again. Her phone buzzed again, then again. She kept her eyes on Greg. He had his hands open on the table now, palms up, the gesture of a man demonstrating he had nothing to hide. She'd seen him do it in front of juries. Open hands, steady eye contact, the slight forward lean that said, "I'm being vulnerable with you." She used to find it persuasive. Now she could see the architecture of it. Every piece placed for effect. Every silence measured. "I'm not trying to ambush you," he said. "I just think we owe each other honesty at this point." "At this point," Rachel repeated. The words tasted flat. At this point. As if honesty had a schedule, and he'd penciled it in when it was convenient. Her phone started ringing. Not buzzing. Ringing, the actual ringtone, loud enough that the woman by the window glanced over. Rachel turned the phone over. The station's main line. "Sorry, one sec," she picked up. "Hello? Rachel, it's Debbie. Everything's down. All the computers just, I don't know, they went dark. Joey's trying to reboot stuff, but nothing's coming back on, and the chief is..." She could hear Barlow's voice in the background, barking at someone, the words indistinct but the tone unmistakable. "Can you come back? Like now?" "I'll be there in 10 minutes, Rachel said. She put the phone down. Greg was watching her. He had that patient expression, the one that said he'd planned for this conversation to take an hour, and he'd budgeted for interruptions. He'd probably accounted for the possibility that she'd cry too, and had a response prepared for that. She hadn't cried. She wasn't going to. "Ratch," he said. "Can we finish this first? The whole network is down at the station. And you're the only person who can fix it?" The question was genuine. He wasn't being cruel. He honestly didn't understand why the IT problem at her little police station should take priority over the end of their marriage. And that, the genuine, well-meaning incomprehension of it, was maybe the whole problem, right there, sitting in a cafe in a blazer she'd bought him, asking her to explain why anyone needed her. He hadn't understood it when she was at the bureau. He hadn't understood it when she was up at 2 with a sick kid. He didn't understand it now. "Greg, can we talk about this tonight? Over dinner. Just us, after the kids eat." "I'm not coming home for dinner," he said. Not mean. Just factual. The way you'd say the office is closed on weekends." "Then when?" "I don't know. Soon. We'll figure it out." "We'll figure it out." The phrase couples use when one of them has already figured it out and the other one hasn't caught up yet. He'd figure it out. He'd already been figuring it out. The hotel, the lawyer, the blazer, the speech. She would get whatever was left after he'd finished arranging things to his satisfaction. Her phone rang again. She let it go to voicemail. It immediately rang again. "I have to go," she said. Rach, quote, "I can't." She stopped, grabbed her jacket. She was standing up before she'd finished the sentence, and her hip caught the edge of the table, sloshing his untouched coffee across the surface. It pooled toward the napkin dispenser, dark and spreading. Neither of them moved to clean it up. She walked out of Maple and Main. The bell chimed behind her. The November air hit her face, and she stood next to her car for a moment, keys in her hand, not getting in. The parking lot was mostly empty. A bird was sitting on the dumpster behind the cafe, looking at nothing. Her phone was buzzing again in her pocket. 15 years. She'd moved to this town for him. She'd left the bureau for him. She'd built the entire structure of their family around his career, his hours, his needs, and he'd just sat across from her in a blazer and told her he wasn't happy, like she was the weather, something that had simply failed to be pleasant enough. She got in the car and drove to work.